Liability, he said into the microphone, voice cutting through the conference room like a scalpel through silk. 63 people in the audience, all nursing lukewarm coffee and pretending their phones weren't more interesting than his quarterly address. He said it with that practiced CEO smirk, the kind that comes free with a corner office and an overpriced business coach. But his eyes? His eyes weren't smiling. Mine weren't blinking. I was clutching the folder, still warm from the printer. Cost optimization analysis, 47 pages of data I'd spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting. Red flags on every supplier vulnerability, backup vendor assessments, risk mitigation strategies that could save them millions. I started to speak up. He raised his palm like a traffic cop and repeated it louder this time. We can't afford liabilities dragging down our efficiency metrics, can we, folks? The laughter came quick and hollow. Nervous energy that smelled like desperation and career preservation. He kept talking, but I stopped listening. I was staring at the conference table's fake wood grain, wondering how many years of dedication it takes to become a punchline. That was the moment. The exact second I knew the game had changed. 4 years in that glass tower. Not once did they see me. They saw reports. They saw spreadsheets. They saw someone who didn't laugh at the right jokes during team-building exercises or fake enthusiasm about ping-pong tournaments and mandatory fun Fridays. What they didn't see, what he didn't bother to discover, was that I was the only reason their supply chain hadn't collapsed during the semiconductor shortage. And now I was a liability. So I stood up. No dramatic exit speech, no slamming doors. I just gathered my thermal mug, the black one with the university logo that had survived 4 office moves, my leather portfolio, and my access badge. I left the folder on the table, 47 pages of insights, highlighted, annotated, ignored. I didn't look back. You only look back when there's something worth remembering. And hey, if you've stuck with me this far, maybe hit that subscribe button. 93% of viewers watch without subscribing, and trust me, it helps more than you know. These stories take bottomless coffee and sleepless nights to craft. Keep us caffeinated, yeah? I walked past the marketing interns avoiding eye contact. Past accounting pretending urgent spreadsheet emergencies. Past the COO who once told me I had a supernatural ability to predict vendor failures. I didn't feel supernatural. I felt hollow, like my nameplate had been scraped off the org chart and tossed in the recycling bin with last quarter's motivational posters. By the time I reached the parking garage, my hands were steady. Not from acceptance, from clarity. Like fog lifting off a lake, like seeing the second half of a magic trick. Because here's what nobody in that room knew. Not accounting, not the COO, not even the smug CEO with his discount store charisma and LinkedIn thought leadership addiction. 18 months ago, when our primary supplier was hemorrhaging cash, I didn't just negotiate better terms. I invested. Quietly, legally, permanently. The paperwork was filed before their holiday party, the one they held during my scheduled vacation, naturally. But that day, that walk to the car, that wasn't revenge. That was just me stepping aside and letting physics do the work. By 6:18 p.m., the office was empty except for the security guard reading a paperback thriller and the cleaning crew humming 80s hits 3 floors down. I was alone, if you don't count the IT contractor passed out in his cubicle with an energy drink graveyard on his desk. I packed slowly, not from sentiment, but because I knew once I walked out, I'd never need to come back except as a ghost. I took the essentials. My notebooks, handwritten, no digital trails. My mug, still faintly warm. And one photo I'd kept taped under my monitor. Me and Chen, the supplier CEO, laughing over blueprints at their factory the day we signed our first contract. Nobody ever noticed it was there. Fitting. I deleted my personal files with surgical precision. Not just documents, breadcrumbs. No chat histories, no email threads, no scanned receipts. Gone like the rest of me would be in about 15 minutes. I wiped down my keyboard with an alcohol pad. Not for them. For ritual. And then I did the only truly sentimental thing. I left a post-it note on my desk plant. Water twice weekly, it said. No signature. If they can't figure out who wrote it, they don't deserve the plant. The flashback hit as I shut down my workstation. 18 months ago, flying economy to Portland because procurement wouldn't approve business class. Knees jammed against the tray table, sketching contingency clauses on cocktail napkins. Chun met me at baggage claim, expression unreadable. Back then, his company was one missed payment away from bankruptcy. He said something I'll never forget: if you walk away, we die. If you stay, I'll make sure you never regret it. Most people heard desperation. I heard opportunity. Over dinner at a fake Irish pub that reeked of stale beer and broken dreams, we drafted the first version of the clause on hotel stationery. If either party experiences significant operational restructuring, the other retains the right to review partnership terms, including ownership transfer options. 6 months later, during their refinancing, he offered me equity instead of a consulting bonus. I accepted quietly. Another year later, he called me at 5:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. "You ready?" he said. I asked, "For what?" He just laughed. "Majority." I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was hiding anything, because I didn't need to. At home that night, I poured a glass of decent red wine, kicked off my heels, and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. There it was. Plain manila envelope with my name in Chen's careful handwriting. Inside, shareholder agreement, signed, notarized, binding. Underneath, a note in his handwriting: "You were never a liability. You were the infrastructure." I sat on my living room floor, back against the bookshelf, drinking that wine like communion. Let them think I vanished. Let them think I gave up. Sometimes silence is just the sound of a trap closing. The next morning, HR sent one of those glossy, soulless emails. Subject: Exciting evolution in supply chain strategy. Body: As part of our commitment to innovation and operational excellence, we're transitioning key vendor relationships to an AI-powered procurement platform. We thank Jane for her contributions and wish her success in her future endeavors. Future endeavors. Like I'd won a lottery ticket, like they hadn't publicly dissected me in front of a whiteboard covered in buzzwords and color-coded timelines. The new CEO swaggered through the building that week like a rooster with an MBA. Even cracked a joke during the Thursday all-hands: turns out liabilities have a way of removing themselves. The laughter this time was cleaner, rehearsed, like they'd all decided it was easier to move forward than ask uncomfortable questions. But by the following Monday, the cracks started showing. A critical component shipment went missing. Aerospace-grade titanium alloy gaskets, tiny pieces barely bigger than coins, but without them, their entire production line hits a wall. The tracking showed in transit, but never updated past the Oregon border. In the break room, someone whispered, "Didn't Jane usually handle expedited orders?" Someone else shrugged, "I thought that was automated now." Inside the operations Slack channel, timestamps told a different story. 6 hours of silence. Then a tentative message from Kim, a junior analyst with a nervous laugh and eyes like a startled deer. "Hey team, anyone know whose point on vendor relations now? Getting notices about delayed shipments." A minute later, the COO assigned the contact sheet to Trevor. Trevor had transferred from sales 3 months ago. Wore pocket squares unironically. Thought pivot tables made him dangerous. They handed him the supplier directory and said, "Handle it." Trevor called. Got transferred twice. 30 seconds into the conversation, his face went pale. He fumbled for the mute button. Then this: "They said they can't discuss account details without C-level authorization. I told them I was the authorized contact." Pause. Trevor deflating like a punctured balloon. "They said," and I quote, "we have new authorization protocols now." That afternoon, production flagged another issue. Replacement parts were listed as pending executive approval. Trevor tried again. This time, they told him all communications needed to go through official corporate channels. Not a delay, a wall. In the engineering pit, the whispers started: "Did Jane ever mention backup vendors?" "Not that I remember." She kind of was the vendor relationships, wasn't she? In marketing, someone half-joked, "Did we accidentally fire the one person keeping the lights on?" And still leadership smiled, pushed their AI narrative, threw around words like optimization and scalability and growing pains. But panic was starting to leak through their press releases. Small things, tight voices in meetings, forwarded emails with vague subject lines like "urgent clarification needed on vendor protocols." By Thursday, the operations dashboard had a new section, pending/critical. It had 22 entries and counting. The email arrived Friday at 8:43 a.m. sharp. Subject line so bland it almost went unnoticed: updated partnership terms and authorization protocols, effective immediately. Addressed to the CEO, CC'd to legal and procurement, and 2 external law firms nobody in the building recognized. From the supplier's corporate inbox, flagged high priority. Red exclamation point. No pleasantries, no hope this finds you well, just business. The CEO opened it during a budget meeting that had already devolved into finger-pointing. He scanned the first paragraph and froze. The room, already tense, went cemetery quiet. He didn't say anything, didn't even pretend to read further. Just slowly turned the color of old newspaper, like someone watching their GPS cheerfully route them into oncoming traffic. Without a word he stood up, left his laptop open, walked through the glass doors, past reception, down the hallway like a man trying to outrun a sniper's crosshairs only he could see. Procurement exchanged looks. Did he just, should someone check what it says? Someone finally reached for the laptop. The message wasn't long. 3 paragraphs, precisely worded, legally airtight. Paragraph 1, notification of updated partnership terms due to recent organizational changes on the client side. Paragraph 2, declaration of new authorization procedures, including executive signatory changes effective immediately and retroactively applying to all current and future orders. Paragraph 3, all supplier communications would now be directed through the chairman of the board, whose contact information was listed in full. At the bottom, a digital signature. Underneath it, a single name. Procurement stared at the screen like it had grown fangs. "Is that Jane?" someone whispered. The intern from finance actually gasped like a soap opera plot twist had walked off the screen. And slapped them. Nobody spoke for 90 seconds. Then Kim, bless her confused heart, said what everyone was thinking: "Wait, she's what now?" Nobody had an answer. But deep down, they all knew whatever illusion of control they thought they had just evaporated like mist under Jane's heel. And she didn't even need to be in the building to do it. The panic began not with shouting, but with silence. Long, suffocating silence, the kind that wraps around a company's throat and squeezes while everyone pretends it's just normal business pressure. Procurement tried calling the supplier. Blocked. Legal sent clarification requests. No response. The COO emailed a bullet list of non-negotiable requirements. That email bounced back with an auto-reply: "Please direct all communications through updated channels per Governance Addendum 7C. Thank you." Governance Addendum 7C didn't exist in their system. It did in Jane's. By noon, leadership looked like a broken sprinkler system, flailing in every direction, spraying confusion. The CEO cancelled his afternoon golf meeting. Spent most of the day behind closed doors, pacing. At one point, he emerged just to snap at a junior analyst for using too many variables in a quarterly projection. The analyst started crying in the supply closet. Meanwhile, across town in a quiet business hotel, Jane checked into a conference suite under the name R. Thompson. No particular reason for that name, just something about the R that sounded appropriately corporate. She smiled politely at the concierge, accepted the keycard, and carried her laptop bag like it contained nothing heavier than weekend reading. Inside the room, faux mahogany desk, blackout curtains, artificial fern, and a complimentary mint that had fused to its wrapper. On the desk sat a FedEx envelope, pre-arranged delivery. Inside, updated governance documents for the supplier, freshly signed, notarized, certified. Small yellow note clipped to the top in Chen's precise writing: "Welcome to the top floor." She didn't celebrate, didn't call anyone, didn't shout checkmate at the ceiling. She simply opened her laptop, connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, and began reviewing quarterly forecasts. Because this wasn't revenge, this was repositioning. You don't burn bridges when you can buy the toll booth and set the rates. Back at headquarters, the COO was red-faced, muttering about fiduciary negligence, and who the hell vetted this woman? The head of compliance pointed out weakly that Jane's financial activities had been above board, discreet, but legal, executed through a holding company with no public connection to her name. That holding company now owns 67% of the supplier, the legal counsel said, staring at his tablet like it had delivered a death sentence. Controlling interest with full board authority. Which means she can approve or deny any terms. She is the terms, the COO said flatly. The The board demanded an emergency session. One member asked point-blank, "Did we know she had ownership?" The CEO blinked rapidly. Of course not. She wasn't that strategic. That sentence hung in the air like a fart in church. Meanwhile, Jane sat in her conference suite, calmly drafting an email to a competing manufacturer in Michigan she'd quietly courted for 8 months. They'd recently lost their parts supplier. She had ideas. On the whiteboard behind her, she wrote one word: leverage. She underlined it twice and smiled. The next morning, 7 people were in the executive conference room by 6:30 a.m., nursing burnt coffee and sweating through their blazers. The CEO arrived late, tie crooked, hair flat on one side like he'd slept in his car. No greetings, no small talk, just a white-knuckled slam of his tablet on the conference table. "Why is our supplier ghosting us?" Nobody answered. Not because they didn't know, but because nobody wanted to be the one to say her name out loud. The head of legal, a man who normally spoke like a tax document and smelled like mothballs and regret, finally cleared his throat. "They haven't ghosted us. They've redirected communication." Redirected to who? The CEO snapped. Legal slid a folder across the table. Inside, printed email chain. The last message read, "Please direct all inquiries to our chairwoman per revised corporate structure." Attached was a professional headshot, navy blazer, silver necklace, eyes looking straight ahead like she could see the future and had already made her decision about it. Jane Mitchell, chairwoman. Official. The room went silent again. The CEO picked up the folder, stared at the photo like it was evidence from a crime scene. "She's not qualified." "She owns 67%, the COO said flatly. "That doesn't require qualification. She is the board." The CEO stood paced, his shoes squeaking on cheap laminate like they were screaming. "We need legal action. We need to remind them who the client is." He tried. Really did. Sent a formally worded threat through corporate counsel that same afternoon. Claimed breach of implied contract. Accused the supplier of conspiracy. Gave them 72 hours to resume services under previously established terms. 6 hours later, a response: "We are happy to continue business under our updated structure. All terms now subject to approval by Chairwoman Mitchell. Please confirm understanding to proceed." Below that, her signature: "Digital, clean, final." Below that, a footer line in bold: "Mutual respect is the foundation of sustainable partnerships." The CEO lost it. Threw his phone across the office, shattering it against the window. Screamed something about traitors and ungrateful spreadsheet drones. He summoned the IT director, demanded every archived email Jane had ever sent. "Find the smoking gun," he growled. There wasn't one. Because Jane hadn't needed to hide anything. Every move had been documented, patient, legal, bulletproof. While he'd been strutting through meetings and slapping corporate jargon onto PowerPoint slides, she'd been quietly installing the infrastructure under his feet. By the following Friday, department heads stopped asking when things would return to normal. They started asking what Jane wanted. And that's when it hit him. Not just the logistics, the shift. The silence in the office wasn't confusion anymore. It was allegiance. Unspoken, unconfirmed, but there. Jane had left the building. She hadn't left the equation. She was the equation. The request came late Friday evening, sent from a procurement manager whose name Jane barely remembered, Brad or Brett, maybe Brandon, one of those men who spent Q2 forwarding attachments and avoiding confrontation. Subject line was corporate bland: "Meeting request, partnership discussion opportunity." No mention of the CEO. No CC to legal. Just a quiet plea typed after hours, as if the sender didn't want anyone knowing he still believed relationships could be salvaged, even after the foundation had cracked. Jane waited until Saturday afternoon to respond. 1 hour. Neutral ground. Riverfront Hotel Lounge. 2 p.m. Sunday. She arrived 5 minutes early, not to intimidate, but because punctuality was power. The riverfront was polished without being ostentatious. Leather chairs, marble floors, jazz that sounded expensive without being identifiable. A place built for decisions that had already been made. He was there, sweating lightly in a suit with shoulder padding from 2009. Stood when she entered like she was royalty or a resignation letter. She nodded but didn't extend her hand. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I live 12 minutes away," she replied, sliding into the chair across from him. "Let's not waste the hour." He blinked, nodded, pulled out a legal pad already wrinkled from nervous handling. "So," he began, "obviously there's been some confusion. We'd love to re-establish the working relationship we had prior to." "We don't have a working relationship," she interrupted. "Not harsh, precise. You had terms. They expired. You had leadership. It failed. Now we start fresh." He swallowed, glanced around the lounge, lowered his voice like she might detonate a PR disaster right there by the appetizer menu. "I understand. We're hoping to rebuild trust." Jane sipped her coffee black, no sugar, eyes locked on his. "Trust," she repeated. "Let's discuss that. You trusted an algorithm to replace people. You trusted a man who called competence a liability. And when the person keeping your operation functional walked out, you trusted silence to mean surrender." He sat very still now. No fidgeting, no blinking, just listening like a man watching floodwater rise slowly through the floorboards. Jane set her mug down gently. "Business is still possible," she said. "But we negotiate from a different position now." She reached into her bag, pulled out a single page. "New terms. Higher rates, advance payments, no volume discounts, and quarterly face-to-face reviews with me personally." He read it once, then again. "These margins represent a significant change." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "So did calling me a liability." Long pause. He said nothing. "I'll take this to legal." "You'll take it to the board," she corrected. "The CEO doesn't need to be involved." Just like that, she stood, smoothed her blazer, picked up her mug. 1 hour exactly. Before leaving, she turned back briefly. "I'm not here to punish," she said. "But I'm also not here to be forgotten." Then she was gone, quiet as a blade. The emergency board meeting was called for Monday, 7 a.m. sharp. No pastries, no presentation materials, just 12 suits and one CEO who looked like he hadn't slept since Wednesday and might have tried drowning his problems in grocery store scotch. They started with numbers, projected delays, revenue losses, penalty clauses stacking like dominoes in an earthquake. Then finally, the procurement update. A flat-voiced VP read the summary: Supplier now under new executive control. Revised contract terms delivered. 23%. Cost increase across all SKUs. Net, 15 terms eliminated. Exclusive manufacturing rights under review. Final slide, majority ownership, J. Mitchell Holdings, 67% equity. Silence. Heavy, padded with disbelief. One of the older board members, an ex-CFO with skin like crumpled paper and a voice like broken chalk, squinted at the projection and muttered, "Is that our Mitchell?" The CEO cleared his throat, tried to adopt that fake casual authority he'd been practicing since landing the role. "Yes, well, that was unexpected. Obviously, there were gaps in our internal oversight procedures. Let's remember, Jane never disclosed." "She wasn't required to," another board member snapped. A woman in a charcoal blazer who once called the CEO a PowerPoint peacock during Q3 reviews. "She didn't owe us disclosure. The supplier was external. You eliminated her before you understood what she controlled." "She left voluntarily," the CEO insisted, voice tight. "She left with a coffee mug," the paperskin man said. "And you handed her the factory." A soft chorus of Jesus and throat clearing filled the room. "Do we have any leverage?" someone asked. "She owns the vendor," someone else replied. "Can we position this as strategic partnership?" "You want to spin losing our exclusive supplier as strategy?" The CEO raised both hands. "Look, this is manageable. We just need to renegotiate." "You tried," the charcoal blazer interrupted. "She sent you a price increase and a chair with your name scratched off." Silence again, thicker this time, like a closing vault. Then the death sentence, spoken quietly: "I think it's time we discussed a leadership transition." The CEO's jaw clenched. No protest, no speech, just the slack-faced realization that this chapter would end with a footnote starring the woman he dismissed in front of his entire staff. By 4 p.m., A press release was drafted. By 6 p.m., Jane's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered anyway. "Ms. Mitchell?" came a voice like overcooked oatmeal. "The board wanted to reach out about possibly returning in some capacity. We believe your leadership would be." She didn't let him finish. "Pass," she said, and ended the call. Then she flipped her phone face down, leaned back on her sofa, and exhaled through a quiet smile. They'd finally seen her. Too bad they'd gone blind before it mattered. 3 weeks later, the product launch happened, if you could call it that. Stumbled onto the market with a broken demo video, 2 major compatibility issues, and a last-minute design compromise that made it useless with half the components they'd promised to replace. The new CEO, a finance guy with all the charisma of a spreadsheet, stood behind a generic backdrop reading from a teleprompter like he'd just learned English. They called it adaptive innovation. Jane called it duct tape in a business suit. She watched the live stream on mute from a corner table at a quiet cafe in the Arts District. Rain tapped softly against windows, smooth jazz drifted from overhead speakers, and her mug sat in her hands, thin steam curling upward like smoke from a recently fired weapon. Across from her, nobody. No cameras, no entourage. Just a woman drinking coffee, watching an empire she once powered struggle to run on fumes. Her phone buzzed. New email from Lily, her assistant. Subject: contract finalized. Body: competitor deal locked. Supplier maintains exclusivity rights. Terms non-negotiable. They signed without edits. You were right about their pressure points. Congratulations, boss. Jane sipped. The coffee was dark roast and unapologetic, like her. Outside the cafe window, traffic flowed past, unaware, indifferent. The world kept spinning, just without the illusion that she needed anyone's permission to steer it. She caught her reflection in the glass, still sharp, not exactly smiling but close. The expression you wear when weight that used to crush you now rests quietly in your control. No speeches, no revenge monologue, no dramatic voiceover. Just a woman with a mug, a contract, and the kind of power nobody gives you. You take it. And keep it. From liability to leverage. The end didn't need applause. It already happened. This story hits different because it's not about revenge, it's about recognition. Jane didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful moves happen after you walk away, not while you're still fighting to be heard. Thanks for watching, corporate survivors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own.